Hello, North Park, Barry here. The following video is the recording of the table talk with the docs that occurred on Sunday night, March 21st. Now, as you watch through this video, you will notice markers in the video that tells you there's a link to a video below. That is the videos that the doctors used in their talk that I couldn't put in this video because of copyright. So if you just pause your video, go down to the link, click it, you'll be able to watch the video that should have been inserted into that area. So carry on, watch this video. We're going to dive right into Dr. Kanghausen Jan, and let's get going.
And in case you think that I'm being overly dramatic or something like that, that's an actual photo that I took a few weeks ago when I was on the inpatient service. And the reason why we put on that whole getup basically is the protocol that we're following, which is that our eyes must be shielded, our face, well, nose and mouth at least, must be covered. That funny hat, some find it funny, others have been complimenting me about my color coordination, first time in my life, but there you go. Reason why we wear the scrub cap is partly because from the early days of the pandemic, there was word out from countries where the case numbers were very high that potentially covering up your head might be a layer of protection that you could take advantage of. And partly it's very practical that I have two of those scrub caps, and they have little buttons that are sewn in towards the back. And those buttons are where I put my ear loops on, because if I were to work the entire day with the ear loops behind my ear here, it gets kind of painful and uncomfortable by the end of the day. So it's partly self-protection that we have that habit, and I know that many of the nurses and other physicians do the same thing in order to save themselves. Every person who comes into the hospital who has not had a COVID test, or where we think that there may be a possibility that they may be infected, are put into what's called a droplet and contact isolation. And so if you look at that photo behind my head, you'll see the sign that they put up at the doorway, just to remind everybody that we need to take the greatest precaution going into the room. I can tell you from just having been on the ward, but thankfully not having to go into a patient's room, that if you're actually on the ward where there are COVID patients, then the protection would be even greater still. The mask that I was wearing, for instance, would be deemed inadequate, and people would need to be wearing their N95 masks. And on a regular basis, we have fit testing done with those masks to make sure that they're making a proper seal. Every 6 months or so, we have to do an online course, basically reminding ourselves about or teaching us exactly what the steps are for donning and doffing. Every time that they have called a cardiac arrest over the PA system in the hospital, apart from giving the location and those kinds of things, the last sentence usually when they make the announcement is, please follow donning and doffing procedures. So that's a fact of life. And it's not just the inpatient ward either. In the outpatients as well, periodically, there are people that we've encountered who have, again, symptoms that could be due to COVID. I have personally had, I think, about 2 or 3 encounters so far of patients in the outpatient department whose status was not known at the time when they came to see us, but who were soon found to be positive. So this is happening on a regular basis. We take absolutely nothing for granted. Even if I've known that person for years and years, in a doctor-patient relationship, we basically assume the worst, which is that they may be infected, or they may be infectious at least, and that everybody needs to be protected. So that's our basically that's our life in the hospital right now, and we have lots of conversations with patients and families about why aren't we letting people come in with patients and things like that into the outpatient department or the chemotherapy unit and so on. You know, that's what life is like. And the whole video runs for about 20 minutes. It was put up originally by the New York Times, and basically shows, I think, over a 2-day period, clips of what's happening in a fairly modest sized ICU in Phoenix, Arizona. Before I run the video, I should also caution anybody who has gone through traumatic experiences, who may have PTSD, to please give us 5 minutes here, which is about as long as this clip is going to run, because some of the scenes are pretty upsetting. And, you know, I do want you to look after yourselves as well.
So my name is Mario Elia. I'm a family doctor here in London, and happy to be joining you guys again for another great talk. You know, I would compare this to the previous couple sessions that we've done. This is perhaps a hopeful session in a way that we get to talk about vaccines, which I know is obviously top of all of our minds, and we're seeing lots of it on the news and hearing it amongst friends. So I'm really glad that we could have this opportunity tonight to answer literally whatever questions you guys have about anything related to the COVID vaccine or other issues related to COVID, but I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of questions about the vaccine. The video that we're gonna show first is a video that I did for Rogers Television that some of you may have seen as you flick across the TV over the last few weeks. So this is a question and answer that I did. It's about 20 minutes or so. So what I thought we would do is play that video first. I filmed it about 4 weeks ago, but most of the content is actually held up pretty well in terms of how accurate it still is. What we'll do afterwards is I'll add some clarification if things have changed since the video. And then really, I want to open it up to any questions that you guys have, because I'm sure there's lots of questions. You may be hearing things from friends, hearing things from TV and not sure. Some of you maybe have appointments, or some of you have already been vaccinated or have family that's going to be vaccinated. Some of you may be on the fence. We want to answer whatever questions you guys have to make sure that everyone feels comfortable about getting the vaccine in the next little bit. So I will play the video first, and then I'll jump in afterwards for any questions. So remarkably, a lot of that held up pretty well a month after. There's a few updates before we take questions that I think I want to clarify. So the graph about when it went vaccine by vaccine, talking about the effectiveness, and you probably noticed that AstraZeneca number around 65, and you thought, well, that one didn't look as high as the other ones. The thing to keep in mind, despite the fact that it may not be as effective in preventing all COVID, is that in preventing severe COVID, meaning hospitalizations, deaths, AstraZeneca looks like it's pretty darn effective, if not almost as effective as those other ones. So that's why when you see a rollout of certain age groups getting certain ones, and 60 to 64-year-olds in certain cities being offered the AstraZeneca vaccine now. The reason why we feel confident in giving that vaccine is that it is pretty effective in preventing severe disease. I can tell you my own father, who is in that age cohort, has received his AstraZeneca vaccine, and I encouraged him to get that vaccine. So again, that's my own flesh and blood who's now received the AstraZeneca vaccine. Myself, my mother, who's a healthcare worker, we both received our Pfizer vaccines. So again, we're kind of practicing what we preach in terms of getting vaccinated. So again, I mentioned the video, but again, whatever vaccine you're offered, all of the offerings right now in Canada, we consider to be safe, we consider to be effective. Do not wait for, I had one patient I talked to yesterday, she said she was going to wait for the Johnson & Johnson. I said, we don't know when that's coming. We don't know if it's any more effective, and cases are going to rise over the next couple of months. We're seeing it already. And we may not see restrictions put in place if deaths and hospitalizations don't rise. So to put our, the life raft is there. Use it, take it when it's offered, regardless of what you're offered. One other thing I want to clarify around eligibility, because obviously that's one thing that's changed since the video. So as many of you know, 80-year-olds, as of a few weeks ago, were 80-plus-year-olds were able to book their vaccine, and still are able to book their vaccine appointment now. So that's really exciting. And we have additional news, if you haven't already seen this in the news over the weekend, that anyone turning 75 this year or older can book their appointment. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Spots go available on the website. So that's covidvaccinelm.ca. If you want to put that in the chat there. So that's the website that people can go to book. Again, as I mentioned in the video, if you know someone in your life who is not technologically savvy, if you yourself are not tech savvy, now is the time to be reaching out to those people in your life to try to connect, to try to get help signing up online. Typically, and this is going to be the case tomorrow too, online appointments come available a couple of days before the phone appointments. So if you can book those appointments online, you'll get in a bit quicker than others. So the 75-year-olds are going to be eligible as of tomorrow. What we're probably going to see every couple of weeks is you're going to see 5-year increments. So the 70 to 74-year-olds are going to be next, then the 65 to 69-year-olds, and just going to go down and down and down. In the next week or so, in addition to the 75-year-olds, you're going to see a couple of other age eligibility groups come up too, based on their health. So anyone who is on, anyone who's had leukemia or lymphoma in the last year, anyone who has severe kidney disease, and again, your physician will likely notify you if you have level of kidney disease. If you are on certain, if you're on if you're a previous transplant recipient, if you've, I think, sorry, Ken can correct me here. I have to read the criteria, but I think it's if you're stem cell treatment recently. I can't remember what the. Ken, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, phase 2 would include immunosuppressed people who are on active cancer treatment and so on. So the stem cell transplant group basically is the immunosuppressed group.
So that'll be the first health group. The other health groups, you may have seen this based on severe obesity and other immune suppressing meds. Those will be later on. So again, follow the news. The health unit will be broadcasting this as we go along. But again, the big change this week is the 75-year-old plus being eligible, which is really exciting. So we've got some questions here that we can start working through. And again, if you have any questions, we've heard them all. Happy to answer whatever question you guys have. This is one of these rare times where you get to watch a television show and you get to ask the person right away for clarification. So don't be afraid to take advantage of it. So question here is is vitamin D recommended in building resistance to COVID? I've seen YouTube videos saying it lessens the severity of symptoms. So I've seen a lot of this online too with these claims. The bottom line is this, that there are no high quality trials showing that vitamin D is effective for either treatment or prevention of COVID. Does it hurt? Probably not at low doses. May it help? We can't say for sure. Vitamin D's been proposed for a lot of medical conditions over many years, and a lot of those trials, when they finally got done good trials on vitamin D, have kind of failed. So it wouldn't surprise me in the least if we actually do get a good vitamin D trial that shows that it's not effective. So if someone wants to take it, it's pretty inert. I don't feel obliged to take it. It's probably not going to do much. That's kind of where we're at with the vitamin D literature right now. So a lot of the things you've seen online are a bit exaggerated claims. How do we get notified when we're eligible for the vaccine? So this is a good question. So it depends on a few factors. So the age cohorts, generally you'll be notified, generally you'll have to see it through the news. I've called my patients, but I'm definitely the minority because it's a lot of people to call and it's quite labor intensive. I called about 90 people yesterday in their late 70s. So it was, my wife is very patient with me when I decided to make all these phone calls. Don't be expecting phone calls based on age from your family physician or anybody else. You may get notification, for instance, from, you know, if you're followed by your kidney doctor for severe kidney disease, some of them may be contacting patients here and there, but really I wouldn't rely on hearing it from any sources. Follow the news carefully. Follow social media carefully, because generally this is going to be a big word of mouth thing for a lot of these conditions. One thing I will give you some additional information on. This is hot off the press. So if you are someone who is homebound and not followed by home care, we are working on a process right now to get family physicians vaccine by house calls. If you're a homebound patient receiving care from the LIN for home care, they will be doing your vaccine at some point in the next probably month or so. But again, if you're not receiving home care but homebound, or if you know somebody in that boat, have them reach out to their family physician. Family physicians don't know that they're going to be involved in this yet. We're going to be notifying them, but they'll have the ability to go out and do house calls for homebound patients, because we want to be making sure that everyone gets access to these. I'm a 61-year-old cancer patient. I have a choice to receive AstraZeneca vaccine tomorrow or receive a Pfizer vaccine on March 29th. Which one would you choose? That's an excellent question. So if the choice is within a week, I would probably choose the Pfizer. To be completely honest with you, waiting an extra week is going to do much harm. So I probably would take the Pfizer. Again, minimal benefit, but I think probably reasonable. An extra week's not going to make much of a difference.
I should also jump in here and say that there's really very little data about efficacy, certainly not between manufacturers and brands, but in subgroups of patients like cancer, immunosuppression, and so on. There are lots of consortia, and we have our own plans to study it in patients who are taking active cancer treatment to see whether or not the effectiveness of vaccination for COVID will match what we have previously observed with both the flu vaccination and also the H1N1 vaccine. So it's a big blank space right now. We won't know the answer for probably another few months yet, because the cancer patients, immunosuppressed patients, and so on are going to be just a small part of everybody else. So if Canada is already struggling with numbers of people vaccinated, then it's going to take us a while to get enough patients in each subgroup to figure out whether or not there's a difference between them. Also, just underneath that question was one about blood clots and the AstraZeneca vaccine. And this is not scientific, which is the reason why I'm recommending it to most people, but there was a piece in the Guardian newspaper, it's on the website still probably, that you can look at. But the author obviously has some insight about the scientific literature and so on. And he points out that this whole controversy about blood clot risk with AstraZeneca came up because of a little cluster of, I'm not exactly sure, 3 patients, 7 patients, something like that, who had blood clots within a fairly short space of each other. And this is purely my editorializing now, and so don't take it as being anywhere close to being gospel truth. But the warnings all came out of EU countries. AstraZeneca famously is the collaboration with Oxford University, and therefore primarily derived from research done in Britain. And you may all have heard about this thing called Brexit. And so I would speculate about whether or not there's some political gamesmanship going on there that has led to this storm in a teapot kind of a situation. In any case, the fact of the matter is that even if you make the estimate on the high side and say that it was 10 cases of blood clots out of how many hundreds and thousands of doses that have been delivered right now, if you calculate the actual case rate, then and then you compare that with what would have been expected in the people who have been taking that particular vaccine, then what you'll soon realize is that the number of cases or the incidence is in fact probably even lower than what would even be expected in the general population. So scientifically speaking, I think those claims are dubious at best. I note just from skimming headlines that the EU countries have since then reinstated the AstraZeneca vaccine. So as I said, tempest in a teapot, I really don't think that there's much scientific merit in this one.
And there's one thing that we know definitely increases risk of blood clots, and that's COVID. And there's no doubt, and COVID definitely increases the risk of blood clots. So even again, the rates that they're seeing, like Dr. Hausenjan said, of clots is quite low. And even if it were a real signal that it increased it by this smidgen, we need to compare it to the risk of actual death from COVID, which across the population would be about 0.5%, right? One in 200. So a 1 in 200 risk of dying of COVID versus this theoretical, maybe even not real risk of getting clots. We need to kind of keep things in perspective with risks and benefits here. A few other questions that have been sent to me privately here. So if someone had quadruple bypass in February and are taking the various drugs, would getting one brand of the vaccine be better than another if there was a choice? Would they be eligible to get the vaccine sooner? So no difference in what I would pick. Again, whatever you're offered, all of them would be reasonable. My father, who I mentioned before, has had bypass surgery before, and he had the AstraZeneca, which I consider to be completely reasonable. Would they be eligible to get the vaccine sooner? Based on how cardiac disease is being treated in terms of where they get it, most people are more likely to get it because of age before they get it because of their cardiac disease. Because hearing from the health unit, it sounds like they'll be getting all the way down to the 60-year-olds before they get to those cardiac patients. So again, most people who've had bypass surgery, I'm guessing, would be 60 or higher for the most part. So generally, age will capture you before your medical condition in that situation. Question here. The question was, we've heard that the COVID vaccine is not a true vaccine at all, but is actually mRNA gene therapy that causes the virus, that causes the body to produce the COVID virus that the body then tries to build a response to. This could cause a potential overblown response later when exposed to the virus. Is any of this true? So the answer is that it's not. When we call something gene therapy, what we're meaning by that, the COVID vaccine is not gene therapy. What gene therapy is was when you take a process to actually take a gene and put it into your own body's genetic, genome, so that it becomes part of your own body's DNA. This is different. This is the template coming in, our body making the spike protein, the immune system to the spike protein, and then the mRNA that came in as part of the vaccine is gone quite quickly. And all we're left with is the memory and our body's response to that spike protein. So the idea that it's going to cause an overblown response or anything like that, it can't possibly cause anything to be more severe than actually getting COVID. Because with the actual virus of COVID, you get the spike protein, plus you get all the other stuff you get with the virus too. So it can't possibly be as severe. And it is a vaccine because what it is exposing our body to something that's inert that can't cause disease to get our body ready to fight if it's actually exposed to the virus. And that's exactly what a vaccine is.
There are lots of vaccines around, not lots, but there are some vaccines around that are live viruses. The Sabin vaccine for polio, for instance, famously was a live virus vaccine. Those are the types of vaccines that I routinely tell my patients who've undergone a stem cell transplant that they should avoid, because of danger that they may actually get an infection because of their immune system being impaired. I have no hesitation whatsoever about any of the COVID virus formulations. There is no capability of the vaccine, no capability within the vaccine of viral replication. In other words, once injected, new virus particles will not be forming in the recipient's body. That's just not the way it works. And so this is a misconception, I think, of what this is based on. I think it needs to be really actively refuted. I see a question on my screen here about breast cancer patients' long-term treatment with hormonal agents, and that can affect a woman's immune system. And should these women be vaccinated with a particular vaccine? And again, I go back to my previous answer, which is that we just don't have very much information at all about different types of cancers, different types of cancer therapies, and whether or not the vaccine will be equally effective, whether the various formulations of the vaccines will be equally effective in different kinds of cancers. So stay tuned. I'd make a plea, because I work in an environment where research is a daily thing. I'd make a plea that if any of you being vaccinated is approached about signing up for a research study to look at what rates of response we might expect to see for patients who have with your particular type of illness, please, please, please sign up, because if we don't study this, we'll learn absolutely nothing. And the rumor mills and so on, as we've seen and heard already, can be very, very active. And there's nothing like disinformation and misinformation to muddy the waters. So please, we need everybody's help here in jumping in and helping out, because you can play a role in helping us to figure out what's happening with vaccination, with minimal danger to you. I should make that very clear, is that from a danger point of view, really, I don't have any reservations.
A few other questions here. And while we're answering these next questions, what I would encourage you guys in the chat, so if any of you are on the fence and have questions that are still nagging at you, that preventing you from getting the vaccine, pop them in the chat and we'll talk about it today. Because again, this is a non-judgmental space, and we want to make sure that any kind of nagging doubts or questions are answered, and that we can help you with those questions. Question here: we have Christian relatives and friends who believe such things as Bill Gates has contaminated vaccines worldwide. Do you recommend anything that would help convince them otherwise? This is a good question. So if it hasn't already become clear to all of you in the last year or even before, there are a number of avenues by which misinformation and full out conspiracies have kind of threaded through our lives, and loved ones who we may not have thought would be susceptible to these kind of conspiracies to become quite entrenched in them, and very difficult to talk them out of these types of conspiracies. What I would suggest is this. Number one, the best thing to do, number one, difficult with COVID, but I think in this case, I think the benefits would outweigh the risk in the situation, would be in-person conversations about these, because, or at least picking up the phone and talking to somebody about it, because online communication, text, typing back and forth, arguing about, Bill Gates doing God knows what with COVID, you're not going to get very far typing back and forth with someone. Even as a physician, I find it difficult to have these kind of conversations with people. So if that's the case, again, pick up the phone, actually talk to them, because sometimes when someone can type something or copy and paste something they've seen in some corner of the internet, but talking on the phone, it becomes much, they hear themselves, and they hear they hear how kind of a little unhinged they sound themselves when they actually have to say it out loud, that they think Bill Gates has put microchips in the vaccine that's going into our arms, and this is some kind of conspiracy. Again, if that's the case, I am lighting up as we speak, because again, I've been vaccinated. So I guess Bill Gates has power over me. So the bottom line, it's not necessarily about correcting their misinformation. It's about bringing them back to reality and bringing them back those in-person conversations. Because if someone's already, seeing a lot of those things on their social media feed, they're just seeing post after post after post that's just reinforcing this. So talking to somebody who's normal, bringing them back into our normal bubbles is actually probably the best thing for them, and trying to pull them away. It's very difficult, but I find those conversations are very important versus, typing comments on their Facebook posts saying, come on, that's crazy. Don't know, why do you believe that? Because then our relationships with them are eroded as well, right? So again, this goes well beyond COVID. This goes into other areas of our lives as well. But those kind of personal conversations are very, very critical to dealing with this misinformation. The question, King, do you want to touch on the question about the J&J vaccine? Because I know that, so I know even amongst some of the more kind of, I'll call them hardcore archdioceses in the U.S., that there's some political bents to have taken some approaches. I don't know if you wanted to try to address this question.
I don't, yeah, thanks, Mary, but I don't actually know a lot about the formulation of this, and I've seen this mentioned, but I really don't know what the origin of this is. So if you have a little bit more information, then please go ahead and share it.
This one may be useful even to kind of chat with hospital with church leadership around. I know personally, I've seen this from some of the other kind of major religious organizations, including the Catholic Church and whatnot. And even many Christian churches have come out strongly supporting these vaccines, even though they come from an old stem cell line. And that, but again, I don't want to delve too deep in the weeds, because I have to profess a bit of ignorance with this. So potentially this is something we can circle back with church leadership about. Are the ingredients in the vaccine similar to other vaccines? Do they have an adjuvant like aluminum or thimerosal as a preservative? The mRNA ones for sure, no. The AstraZeneca, I'd have to check whether it's got definitely not thimerosal. Aluminum, I'm not sure about. One thing to keep in mind though about these ingredients, because I've heard this before about aluminum and how harmful is that? There's many times more aluminum in an antacid than in any vaccine, COVID or not, that's injected. So you just got to keep that. And, I know it seems when you're getting a needle that, is that different in how our bodies are handling things, but not really, not really. And again, to compare it, much more in an antacid, which, we don't worry about the harms of aluminum with that compared to what's in a vaccine. Is there data that shows the vaccine helps long hauler syndrome symptoms? So that's a great question from Matt Eckert. Some people with COVID develop long-term symptoms that do not resolve quickly. I can tell you my first patient who developed COVID, this was March 2020, my very, very first patient with COVID. He was hospitalized. He's a teacher in his 50s, hospitalized with COVID, there for a few days, got out. 1 year later, he is still short of breath with exertion, like a year later. So you'll hear the term long haul. There's another term now, post-acute symptoms of COVID, PASC, that's been used to label these patients. And interestingly, there's now some data, early data, and we have to see that getting vaccinated looks to help some of these patients, which is interesting, because one of the theories behind why they continue to have symptoms is that they're still having viral replication, new virus being developed at a very, very low level, undetectable. If you do a blood test or a swab, it's going to be negative. But the theory is that there might still be some virus replicating at a very, very, very subtle level. And why the vaccine may actually help is that it stimulates the immune system to kind of finally take out that remaining virus and to suppress it. Theory right now, Early studies show there may be an effect, so that, interesting. We'll have to see what happens with the next little bit. The practical piece of that is that if someone has had COVID previously, we do advise that they get vaccinated again. Number one, because we don't know how long they stay immune after getting it. And number two, again, they may see a potential benefit in terms of any long-lasting symptoms. So definitely get vaccinated, even if they've had COVID. I turned 75 in May. Can I register tomorrow? Yes. If you turn 75 anytime this year, you can sign up tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. PEG allergy concerns. So that's if someone has a definite allergy, full-blown allergy to polyethylene glycol, which is what's in Restorelax. So that kind of laxative. So not very common, but if someone has a documented medical allergy to polyethylene glycol, then they're advised not to get the Pfizer vaccine. How likely is it for a young child and toddler to get COVID? In terms of the risk of so this is controversial. The risk of getting COVID may be similar to adults. The rates of getting severe COVID is definitely less than adults. The rate of spreading COVID, if they get it, we don't, you can look at a bunch of different studies and they're all going to show different things right now about, how much more likely or how much less likely they are to spread it. The bottom line is that when they get it, it's less severe than if they got the flu for kids. For adults, very different, right? For adults, COVID is much more harmful than the flu. For kids, probably reverse, where influenza is more severe. But there are some cases of severe COVID as well in kids, which is why we've been taking precautions. I've heard that the AstraZeneca has a bit of live COVID in it. Is that the truth? So that's not true. So none of the vaccines have any live COVID virus in it. None of them do. None of them will. So that won't be a concern. Again, there's no way it can possibly cause COVID, and it doesn't have COVID virus in it.
Noting here that one of the potential explanations for why some of the later, so Pfizer and Moderna were basically the two manufacturers who brought their vaccines out first, who got into clinical trials first, and so on. And so what you tend to see with the subsequent preparations, vaccine preparations, is that the success rate is not quite as high as it was with those first two. And so, that may be the reason why a question like this one comes up about, is it because it has live virus in that vaccine? But really the most likely explanation as to why the success rate may have been a little bit lower is because of the rise of variant ones and the countries in which the clinical trials were run. So the most recent ones with Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca and so on, because they started a little bit later and the prevalence of variants became higher, that may have affected the success rate. It's also worth noting that when we talk about success rates and things like that, each clinical trial basically in agreement with regulatory bodies and so on, defines their success in slightly different ways. And in order to make an apples to apples comparison, you have to do what Dr. Elia did a little bit earlier, which is that you have to use a universally agreed on standard. For instance, the prevention of severe infections and hospitalizations or death rates, something that's very, very firm and solid, that is very practical and applicable. Otherwise, small differences in definition of success and failure may account for differences in numbers. And I think both Mario and I would want to impress on you that really there's not much to choose between these various types of vaccines as far as success is concerned.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of the questions that we'll get to. One thing I wanted to address. So, looking at the the audience here, all ages represented here. And one thing that's going to be important for, again, you guys as vaccine advocates as well, is that for those of you who are seniors, making sure that not only you're vaccinated, because again, that'll give you a very high protection against severe disease, but making sure those around you, family and friends, are vaccinated as well, because we want that cocoon, right? Because if you're nearly 100% protected, there's still a little bit, a bit of risk, right? But if those around you are also almost 100% protected, and those around them are 100% protected, you've now got a ring around you that's pretty effective. And where is this going to be relevant? It's going to be relevant in large settings like churches, right? Because if you get a church, for instance, where a lot of people aren't vaccinated, which I'm sure is going to happen in many churches, right? You guys see this as well with some other Christian groups. COVID's going to spread like wildfire in those groups, because all it takes is one person to get infected and infect the next unvaccinated person and infect the next unvaccinated person. Whereas 99% of North Park gets vaccinated, everyone gets back in church close together and singing, and one person happens to come in with COVID, it's much harder for that person to actually do any damage because everybody's all protected. So it's a real practical thing that we're going to be dealing with for a period of time, because the question came up, and it's a good question, that some countries have done a great job of reducing COVID, like Singapore and Australia. And is this the result of the vaccine or because of their protocols? And could the world use similar methods instead of vaccines? The answer is we probably missed the boat on that, right? And our likelihood of ever getting, without vaccines, getting back to zero is probably 0%. Why? Well, look at yesterday, right? We had a protest in London protesting restrictions that don't currently exist, right? So we live in a society right now where, unfortunately, there are enough people not following the rules where we would never get down to zero, right? People would not stick to the rules long enough to possibly get down to zero. So really, it's going to be an interesting process over the next probably 6 to 12 months, where we're probably going to see cases go up. A lot of us are going to get vaccinated. Some people will unfortunately develop immunity by getting it. We hope not many, but some will. And we'll get to a situation where those who are higher risk, especially seniors who are not vaccinated, will be in an environment probably with a lot of COVID. And I've described this to patients that they'll be sitting ducks. And that's not a threat necessarily, just the reality that we can't just rely on those restrictions anymore, right? Doug Ford's not going to come and shut things down if deaths and hospitalizations aren't skyrocketing. If we've got a lot of COVID circulating, but most seniors are protected, COVID's just going to spread. And you don't want to be that person who's high risk and unvaccinated. That's not going to be in a good position to be in. Another question came up, which kind of segues well into this, is do you personally envision an eventual world where masks and distancing won't be needed? A return to a pre-COVID kind of world, or do you think some of these protocols will be with us long term? What's your personal vision of this? So, Kang, I'll let you chime in here too, but I think I'll just give my real 2 cents. I think we will get back to a level of normal in almost all of our settings. Some things will never go back to the same. For instance, I will probably never walk into a room with a coughing patient without a mask on. I would have in the past. I didn't think twice about it, but certainly I will never do that again. From October to March in my family practice office, will we insist people wear masks in the office? Perhaps, right? Because, people sick in the waiting rooms, we don't want people getting sick that way. So we may see some kind of protocols. But will we get back to people at stadiums and concerts and church and unmasked? I think we will. I think we'll get back to a high quality of life. And my hope is we get there through safe vaccination rather than a mix of a lot of people getting it and a lot of people being vaccinated, because that would be really unfortunate. Thankfully, we've seen in long-term care homes in the last couple of weeks, deaths and hospitalizations have gone way down because of vaccination, which is amazing. Kang, I'll let you chime in there.
Yeah, my view is that we probably will, but my speculation is that it's going to be a while. My best guess right now will be that it'll probably be a couple of years before all of the restrictions are completely eliminated. In my workplace, in the hospitals, I think it's going to be a pretty slow process. When you consider that the sickest of the COVID patients are going to end up in the hospital, those are always going to be areas where a lot of cases are going to be concentrated, where the people who are suspected of having an infection are going to come, and therefore allowing a lot of people to come into those institutions and potentially exposing them to the risk. That's going to take a while for that to happen. What we do out there in the world, away from healthcare settings and things like that, well, I would say that's up to us to determine, isn't it? By what we do and by how much of an influence we have on those around us in protecting each other. There are some groups of people, and I made a point about this during the service this morning, and thanking people who didn't come to the service out of concern for loved ones and so on that they wanted to protect and minimize the risk of having an infection and so on. Those kinds of situations, it's going to take a while. It's been a year now. We're still walking around wearing masks. Most of us haven't been vaccinated yet, even though we think that most of us will be fairly soon, but still, most of us at this point have not yet been vaccinated. Let's look at the world as it is right now. Let's be realistic. I'm not in any kind of a rush to push forward and say, let's open everything up and let's just go back to the way it was. I think we have to be safe, really. I'm a senior citizen now myself, so I'm saying this out of self-protection more than anything else.
A few questions have come in. I can do rapid fire on a few of these. So what about treatments? Most effective right now? Why not more emphasis on these? So there's definitely a big emphasis on treatments, and companies all over the world are working on treatments and looking at what works, what doesn't work. Unfortunately, most of the things that have been studied so far have not been found to be effective. So the things that we have that are effective. So number one, dexamethasone. So that's a steroid, which is found to be effective. But all of the other treatments are either far less effective or not effective at all. So we've seen remdesivir, which is the antiviral. That's used in hospitalized ill patients. Some benefit, but not a huge benefit from remdesivir. They've looked at giving the plasma of recovered patients to active COVID patients to see if that would help. And doesn't look nearly impressive enough to put into to wide practice. There's some specialized antibodies that provide some benefit. Again, not as much as steroids, but that's one potential benefit too. But a lot of things that have been tried haven't worked. So hydroxychloroquine didn't work. Ivermectin was just studied. You probably read about that. That doesn't work either. So again, they're still trying things, right? Because there's it's a capitalist society. These drug companies want to find things that work. So there's still a big push there, but unfortunately nothing else in terms of treatment, which is why we want to be as diligent as we can for prevention. Is getting a vaccine going to protect you for life? Unlikely that it will. We don't know at what interval you'll have to be revaccinated. It might be like the flu shot once a year. It might be less often. It might be more often. We don't know. And that's something that we're going to have to study over time. Do you think there'll be a vaccine for children? If so, do you think the risk versus benefit is worth giving the small risk with children in COVID? It's a very good question. They've just started the studies now on kids going all the way down to, I think, 6 years of age for some trials. But those trials are going to take probably a couple of years, if that, to really look at the safety data, to look at the effectiveness. So we won't have any good data on kids for a long time. So when we do, then we can make decisions about, do we think it's worthwhile to vaccinate kids? But for the time being, it's really a non-issue with no approved products. I've read mixed
And
messages.
also jump in, Mario,
Yeah.
about the question about studying treatments and so on. Understandably, the drugs that have been tried so far have really been targeting the most severe infections, because those are the ones that are lethal. Those are the ones that, for the society at large, are the most expensive ones, because patients need hospitalization, ICU stays, and so on. So, you know, the worst of the worst, if you will. And to date, in Canada at least, I think there are just the 3 medications that have been approved for usage. Tocilizumab, which is the antibody, has an effect on the immune system that kind of blunts the body's reaction to an active COVID infection. And I can tell you, before there was COVID, we were interested in having the hospital pharmacy stock tocilizumab for a different reason. And the expense of the medication for even a single dose of the medication will make your eyes water. So stop me if you've heard this one. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
One other treatment I forgot to talk about was colchicine, which is a treatment that's given for gout. Again, some debate around whether it was effective. The most optimistic look at whether it would be beneficial if given in early COVID. It would have to be given to about 200 people to save one life. So again,
it's fallen off the map as far as clinical trials are concerned.
Yeah. So not too impressive with colchicine either. Yeah. So I've read mixed messages about having the vaccine during pregnancy. At first, I read that no studies have been done, but the benefits outweigh the risks. But if studies haven't been done yet, that is concerning to me. So where are we with pregnancy? So we do have some data building with all the vaccines, actually, because you can imagine that they've been given to women who did not know they were pregnant and then became pregnant. And then that's been an opportunity to actually follow them along to see whether it was harmful to the fetus or not. And it looks like early on that it does not look like it's harmful in pregnancy. I've had many pregnant women in my practice already vaccinated. My wife is pregnant, expecting in July. When her time comes up, we're going to get her vaccinated as well. And here's the simple reason, right? Someone would ask, well, we haven't studied this for years. How do we know it's safe? And the answer is, we're not comparing it to giving nothing. We're comparing it to getting COVID, right? That's the comparison that we need to make, because if I have to choose between giving someone the protein and their body's response to that, or getting the whole darn virus, there's no comparison here. So if we were in an environment where there was no COVID, or COVID rates were extremely low, then I think you can make the argument for delaying vaccine in someone who's pregnant. I could see that being the case, but we don't live in that environment, right? We live in an environment where I have a patient in 14-day quarantine right now because her hairdresser got COVID, right? We live in an environment where there is COVID in our community and it is spreading. So that's the trade-off we're deciding on there. And right now it looks like safety in pregnancy for all of the brands looks effective. Is there evidence that breathing your own breath while wearing a mask is harmful? No, you don't get a buildup of CO2, of carbon dioxide. Surgeons have been wearing masks for hours on end and have not died of carbon dioxide poisoning. It's something that anti-maskers clung to, right, as part of the misinformation that they just crave. And there's no evidence that breathing your own breath will cause a buildup of anything significant. So no harm there.
Drug interactions and the specific example being methotrexate injections for rheumatoid arthritis. So no, there are no known interactions between any of the medications that I've heard about and the vaccine injections. The only question, an important question that we still don't know about, as I was alluding to earlier, is about the efficacy in situations where the immune system is compromised. So safety-wise, no, there's no concern there. And another question about why does it take years to determine the safety of the vaccine for children, but they've done it so quickly for adults. Yeah, and Mario, your practice probably includes more pediatrics than mine, but having been a parent of children and so on, I can well imagine that one of the things that we would be concerned about is in terms of growth and development, and whether or not there could be potentially effects on that. In my own field, in cancer treatments and so on, some of the huge success stories in pediatric cancer treatment, there is now a bit of a pushback because of long-term late complications when kids get to be adults, and looking at some of the side effects of the treatments that they got. When you're looking at a life and death kind of a situation, potentially, the risk may be worthwhile taking. In a situation like this, I suspect that the ethics are a little bit more debatable, since, as Mario was saying before, the severity of infection in youngsters is not comparable to what we have seen at the other extreme of age. But there could still be some potential ethical questions there about testing vaccines in children and needing a longer period of observation, basically, to establish safety.
Yeah, it's look at it as generally a good thing that our threshold for approving treatments in children is higher than for adults, because again, growth development. We know that kids are they're in a phase in their lives where, again, things that they're exposed to can have much more of a negative effect than that in adults. So it's again a good thing that we're more careful with kids, and it's not that we're not as careful in adults, because people would say, well, have we studied these long enough in adults, right? Should we be studying these vaccines for 5-10 years to make sure that they're actually safe? And the answer is that the thing I push back with people is that there are few other products in your life that you hold to that standard, right? So truthfully, like if a new food comes out, like a new form of Pringles, do you wait 5 years for, let's see how my neighbor, let's see how the dill pickle Pringles goes with him, and talk to me in 5 years, make sure you don't grow a second limb, and then maybe I'll have the Pringles. We don't hold anything else to that standard. And I get it, because it's a needle, and I get that. But in reality, in terms of the actual things you're exposed to, it's no different, right? So again, I know it feels tongue in cheek, but there's no plausible reason, because of the stuff that's in the vaccine, for it to be causing some kind of long-term side effect that we're not aware of now, right? There are medications that we do prescribe that are new on the market that, me, Dr. House, and Jan, I'm rarely an early adopter when it comes to certain medications, because just based on their mechanism, you don't really know, until a certain period of time comes out, you don't know whether it's, there's certain things that could come about. The stuff in this vaccine is, in these vaccines is as simple as it gets. And with other vaccines that have been similar in the past, especially the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson types, those the vector vaccines, we haven't seen those kind of long-term side effects, much in terms of long-term side effects at all. So in a perfect world, would we want to study everything for 10, 15, 20 years, a whole generation, to see if things don't pop up? Sure, right? But that's not the reality of for a new heart disease med, right? If a heart disease med comes out that reduces heart attack by 30%, do you want to wait? There's a risk benefit that goes there with looking at how much longer do we want to wait until we're 100.000% sure that it's safe, but at which point you would have already developed plaque in your arteries and we actually missed the boat. So unfortunately, we live in the real world and we have to make decisions now based on the information that we have.
Human beings want certainty as much as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, let's face it, life is full of uncertainties. And I think a lot of what's involved in the art of living, if you will, is how we cope with uncertainty.
Absolutely.
I've been thinking about that topic a lot in the last few years. And I think people will just vary with regard to what they're comfortable with when faced with uncertain situations. I think faith and those kinds of things have a lot to say in situations like that, and that's a worthwhile think for yourself to dwell on that and to contemplate that. Mm-hmm. It is a profitable thing to do.
And someone asked about researching post-vaccine injuries and deaths in North America. Those are actually tracked. There's actually a mechanism by which us physicians, if you give any therapeutic that has any, and we're notified of any negative reaction in a patient, we actually have to, there's a reporting mechanism for that as well. So that does exist, and the government does track that, right? Health Canada tracks that after the fact to make sure that there's not some kind of missed rare side effect of anything that happens. A few years ago with the H1N1 vaccine, there was early reports of narcolepsy, so it said that were investigated and were actually found to be true. But that was found because of the mechanisms that we have in place and early detection systems. So those are actually in place to find these things. Thoughts at going to the gym and working out at this time. Gym requires wearing a mask while present. So I have a membership to the gym that if you can't tell because I have the camera from the shoulders up here, but I haven't gone to the gym in a while. And partly that's because of concerns about the rate of spread, variant spreading. I'm not comfortable enough for myself right now going to the gym. We may get there in the summer. If cases go down. I'm even vaccinated, and it's kind of a bit of a psychological issue getting back to normal life. I'm still using my coat to open the door handles, and so I've got to get over this myself to get back to some kind of normal-ish. But I'm not back at the gym yet myself. I'm not entirely comfortable because we know that there is that rare risk of aerosol spread. People exercising do tend to give off more virus if they're infected. So I'm not comfortable in an indoor environment just yet.
I have been back in the gym, but
good.
But I'm privileged, and I have a personal trainer, and we work in a small studio, so physically isolated from everybody else. And this is just at the Good Life over here at Masonville. And let me tell you, walking in there is just, it's almost surreal how few people are actually there. Mm-hmm. Yes, you still get the absent-minded ones who don't put their masks on when they're walking around, from one station to the next and so on. But overall, I found the staff to be very vigilant in terms of reminding people about what the protocols are. I get emails on a regular basis. You're asked at the door to answer no to the usual list of questions about what symptoms you have or don't have and so on. So, so far so good. But yeah, I have a lot of concerns about risk of spread to others. Most of the employees and people who go there are in age groups that aren't going to be vaccinated for another little while yet. Mm-hmm. As I said, I think I'm in a privileged position in that regard.
Question here, what's the percentage of severe illness and death from COVID? So if it looks like if you take all comers, all age groups, all genders, the risk of death of all people from COVID is about 0.5%. So roughly 1 in 200. That looks like the number. That's of all infections. So of everyone infected, 1 in 200. But that is highly dependent on age. So if someone's 80 or over, a male 80 or over, risk of death from COVID is around 10%, 1 in 10. Right? That's a crazy high number, and then goes down progressively by age. So age plays a huge role in that. But again, all comers 0.5%. And the thing I've told people is, if you take the entire city of London, let me get my calculator out here. So if we were just to allow COVID just to go wildfire, no restrictions, no vaccines, everyone gets COVID, we live with the consequences. Let's do the numbers right here. We got 500,000 people. So that means 2,500 people die, right? 2,500 people we would lose to COVID, right? We have an understandable emotional reaction when there's a homicide of one person in town, right? When the Toronto, remember the man who was just convicted in Toronto for running over those people on the side, was that 10 people, a dozen people, and a huge emotional reaction we understandably had to that. Can you imagine if 2,500 people in the city of London just died just due to COVID? Like that's what I push back on people who just, argue against vaccination, who argue against restrictions, and that we're all overreacting here. Like that's a number I don't think we could, and that's only due to COVID, right? So Dr. Housenjan will tell you if we get a whole bunch of people with COVID and we just let it run rampant, hospitals won't be able to cope with that. Yeah. And then people start dying because they don't get their cancer treatments, and then they don't get their heart treatments, and that's when things really fall apart. So this is why we want to get this under control, and I think we can. I'm quite optimistic about where we'll be at this summer. I think with a combination of the weather, a combination of vaccines, I'm really optimistic in where we'll be this summer. We're not going to be back to normal, but I think we'll be in a good place as a city.
Yeah, let me just add too that the true impact of COVID on society at large won't really be apparent for another few years yet, because it's only in retrospect that we'll be able to look at mortality rates just in society overall, but also with specific types of diseases and so on. Mario is absolutely right. The number of compromises that we've had to make in terms of the types of patients who can and cannot receive treatment in hospitals, the number of surgeries that have been postponed, and maybe not necessarily life and death kinds of situations, but in terms of quality of life, enormous impact and untold cost to society in terms of loss of productivity of individuals who might have been able to do a lot more had they had their joint replacements done on time or whatever other kind of operation we're talking about. And last but not least, the people who are kind of near and dear to me simply because I see them every single day in the hallway, the number of PTSDs that we're going to see among frontline healthcare staff and so on in the coming years. I bet you this is going to be a very similar situation to when we had, large scale wars and so on, and lots of soldiers saw action on the front. You saw the impact, 48-hour window, but you saw the impact of working in an ICU with a high mortality rate because of one and only one disease. Now, if you just multiply that across, even in Canada, just across just Canada, forget the States for a moment, and the toll that that's going to have on people who work in those kinds of settings. There's a mental health thing that's going to be hitting us for sure.
Mm-hmm. Because really, that much as some people decide to take this seriously or not, the hospital has no choice. The hospital has to take it seriously because it knows it's real, and it knows that if they don't take precautions and they don't restrict surgeries because they need ICU beds, then things fall apart. So again, the hospital is the ultimate barometer on how we're functioning here. And thankfully, right now, it looks like things at the hospital are, cases are low enough that
I'm knocking on wood very vigorously right here as you're talking, Mario. Yeah, so far it's working out okay, but this third wave, and I think the third wave is here. Whether the third wave will be as bad as it's been in the past few months with the second wave, we'll need to see. I'm hoping that there's been enough vaccination done that the peak of the third wave can be blunted and be lower than what it was like after Christmas. But I think if anybody's wondering about third wave, yes, I think we are starting the third wave.
And certainly those between 60 and 80, I would say. You're so close to being vaccinated. Now's not the time to have Easter celebrations and to kind of, you are so close. You're within a couple of months of being vaccinated. Again, with the third wave being, on its crest up, now would not be the time to prematurely celebrate. But once we're, the other question too about now 4 month spread of the vaccine. I'm surprised no one's asked about that. So the decision the government's made to have vaccines 4 months apart instead of what the company recommended with the 21 to 28 day. So there's no response here that would have been perfect, right? Because we have a vaccine shortage. Criticize we will the efforts our government's made and how it's gone about acquiring the vaccine, but it is what it is. This is what we have, and we have to decide how we're going to meet this out. And experts far smarter than I. And the UK, I read in the British Medical Journal in the past week that they actually don't actually disagree with the approach we've taken, is that within 2 weeks of getting your first dose, we actually get a pretty robust response. And I've got some, let me drop the numbers here. So about 14 days after your first dose, after getting the Pfizer or the Moderna, you get about 92 to 93% protection. Now, we don't know how robust, we don't know whether that'll last all the way to 4 months or whether there'll be a bit of a drop off. We don't know. But you get a pretty darn good response after the first vaccine. And I think that the logic was, if we only give people their doses 21 to 28 days apart, how long is it going to take us to vaccinate our 65-year-olds, right? It would, we wouldn't have been vaccinating them until summer, crossing our fingers that Joe Biden would be generous with some more vaccines. And I don't think that was a position that they wanted to be in. So getting as many first doses in arms as possible, getting people some protection. Now, what that means in terms of, the CDC the Center for Disease Control in the US has advised that 2 weeks after people receive their second dose, that they can congregate with others who are also vaccinated, and they can congregate maskless without a mask. What does that mean for those who have only received one dose and we're waiting 4 months for our second dose? And the answer is I don't know. I don't know what advice our public health authorities will tell us. Is it unreasonable to take, a little bit of liberty and maybe doing a little more than you would have before? Perhaps. Would I be going around maskless with other maskless people? Again, 92% is not 100%. So I'm not sure I would be there, especially if cases go up. But it'll be something to follow over the next few months for sure. There was a question.
The scientist in me basically says that it's a calculated gamble, basically. The applications were not designed to be given this far apart. It's an extrapolation of information that's being collected. And sometimes those pay off, and there are going to be some times when they don't. It's a bit of a gamble, but as Mario correctly points out, the emphasis has been placed on getting as many people vaccinated, even as starting their vaccination as possible, and as a society. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. It's a very desirable thing, but the hope is that this delay in the second shot is not going to translate into more failures.
There's 3 more questions here. Is there a difference in side effects between what women and men might expect? It doesn't look like it from the data that's come out from those trials of the 3 vaccines that have been approved. No significant differences between men and women. Again, when you do get your shot, don't be surprised if either after the first shot or the second shot that you don't feel necessarily well for a day or 2 after. That's totally expected. And it's an indication of a good immune response and not some serious condition that you've had, right? And so you could feel achy, chills, fever, headache. These are possibilities. I didn't have any side effects after mine, but some people have had it after their first. Some people have had it after their second dose. But that's just a normal immune response. And what I would remind you is that if you get that kind of immune response from a small amount of spike protein your body's created, your reaction to the actual COVID virus would have been much more severe. So this is a much milder reaction than you would have gotten otherwise. So if you do get that after your first dose, don't be scared to get your second dose. It's Tylenol, Advil, rest, fluids, all that kind of stuff. And again, it's completely expected to have that kind of reaction. If we have the most vulnerable vaccinated now during the third wave, why do we need a third possible lockdown? So this is really going to be, I think, city dependent. I'd be shocked if you saw any provincial, as long as our numbers stay where they are, maybe going up a little bit, I think any lockdowns here forward will really depend on hospital capacity in that area, because it's going to take us, so if you look at the numbers we saw right after Christmas, where we just rocket right up, a lot of people got together over Christmas, even in small groups, right? We know that happened. I in my practice, I had about 20 people within that month get COVID in my practice. And, it was one-offs. It wasn't big parties. It was, I got to, so-and-so got together with their mother-in-law and their mother-in-law had it. So it was just these one-offs. So that was an accelerant for COVID, right? Around December, January. We don't have that now. We've got the seasonal component coming up soon where the weather is going to get better, and that's going to drive us down a little bit too. So will we need a third lockdown? We may not. That's just going to depend on hospital capacity. And, Peel region, Lambton, these are places that are seeing pretty high levels of cases leading to high hospital rates. So that's why they've locked down. But cross our fingers we don't end up in the same place, because none of us want that. A friend is on cancer treatment and has been told by her oncologist to get the vaccine, but people are being turned away at the vaccine centers if they're on cancer treatment because they're vulnerable. What should she do? So what may have happened is when she goes there, if she didn't know what treatment she was on, or there was a question around that, sometimes the vaccinators would kind of turn them away and ask them to get clarification from either their family doctor or their oncologist or someone else. So what I would encourage her to do is to have a conversation with her physicians to confirm the safety for the vaccine, have them write a letter if need be, rebook, call the health unit just to make sure that she's okay to rebook and get in. I think that's probably the best course of action. Why aren't okay, this is a good one. Last one. So I agree with the need to be cautious with COVID, but why isn't our government equally concerned about the deaths from overdoses, suicides, domestic abuse, and also the rise in job loss, child abuse, education gaps due to virtual learning? So it's not an and/or, right? And so anyone who's in public health who's been making these decisions is fully aware of the consequences of lockdowns. One of the things that you'll see from people who have been opposed to these lockdowns is suddenly showing an interest in overdoses and suicides and social determinants of health, whereas they really didn't show too much of an interest in this pre-COVID, but now they're suddenly showing an interest in it. The reality is that overdoses were increasing even pre-COVID, and we know they've increased during COVID because of isolation, but the solution to that is to get cases under control so we don't have to lock down. The solution to that is not to just give up, throw away all restrictions, and then let COVID rise, right? These aren't an and/or where you get to choose to not take COVID seriously and then just let everything else open. Because cases go up, you have to lock down. One of the things we've learned is the longer we've put off these lockdowns, the longer they've been, right? And our governments, at some point, in Christmas, they kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And then we had a month lockdown, whereas if they would have put it in place maybe a couple of weeks earlier, it wouldn't have been as long. Suicides have not actually risen. So that's an important one. Has overall mental health declined during COVID? Of course it has. Right? I see this every day in my practice. Of course it has, but that's a consequence of us living through a pandemic. But suicides specifically have not actually risen. So overall, there's been some hospitals have reported an increase in admissions due to mental health causes, but actual suicides, if you look at a lot of studies, that has not shown an increase. And job loss and domestic abuse. Again, these are things that the solution to this is getting things under control so we don't have to do any further lockdowns. The solution to it is not just ignoring COVID completely, sadly.
Thank you for these men who are committed to bring us truth. As Carolyn said, they're doing great work and great service for us. So we thank you for them. Thank you for the work they do to help keep us safe on a day-to-day basis. And we just pray that you would keep their environment safe. And Lord, we just want to thank you for the fact that you are in control. This pandemic has had great impact on our society, but I think in hope together we can declare that you are in control. And Father, we just want to say that together that we declare that you are trustworthy and that we want to intentionally put our trust in you. Lord, we just continue to pray for an end to the pandemic. Thank you for the vaccines, for their role in resolving the issue. And Lord, we want to pray for all those who are currently dealing with the virus. Just we pray that you would just please bring them back to good health. And Lord, as Barry has asked, we'll just pray for the North Park community, for all those involved in this community. And we ask that you would keep us all safe, that you would make us wise in all of these topics, and just help us to know how to move forward in all respects. So thank you again for this time that you have given us, and the wisdom and the truth that's been brought to bear. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.